24 years in the Navy Supply Corps. I retired as a commander. I'll tell you up front that I never fired a weapon in anger during those 24 years. And I will also tell you that without people like me, none of the people who do fire weapons in anger would have ammunition, fuel, food, or a functioning vessel to stand on. That was the job. Somebody runs the supply chain, or none of the rest of it works. I was one of those somebodies, and I was good at it. I retired 4 years ago. Got bored within 6 months, which anyone who has spent a career in logistics could have predicted. Purposeful motion is the only kind I know. A friend from my old command network put me onto part-time consulting work. Regional logistics companies hire retired military supply officers to audit and streamline warehouse operations, find where the books are wrong, clean up the discrepancies. Good work, familiar rhythms. I took a contract with a mid-sized distribution warehouse outside Norfolk, which made geographic sense given how much Navy-adjacent freight and surplus moves through that area. The warehouse ran 18 storage bays. Standard commercial operation on the surface, nothing unusual about the facility or the staff. I was brought in to do a full inventory reconciliation, match physical stock against purchase orders and shipping manifests, find where the numbers didn't close. Routine work for someone with my background. 3 weeks into the contract, I ran the numbers on Bay 14, and the math did not close. Not even close. Bay 14 showed continuous inbound shipments going back further than any other bay in the facility. Further, as it turned out, than the facility's own digital records extended. I pulled everything they had on it. The purchase order number was the first thing that stopped me. I recognized the format immediately, which is not something most people would be able to say. Old-style Navy procurement nomenclature, the kind that was phased out when the contracting system modernized in the early 90s. Seeing that format on an active warehouse receiving log was like finding a cassette tape in a streaming music library. It shouldn't be there. It had no mechanism for existing there. I traced the contract back to its originating vessel, a destroyer. I will leave the name out of this account because I have already sent enough unofficial inquiries in this direction, and I don't intend to send more. Decommissioned in 1991. Stricken from the Naval Vessel Register the same year. Sold for scrap. Officially, that ship has not existed for over 30 years. The purchase order under that contract had never been closed. Standard administrative procedure when a vessel is decommissioned is to reconcile and close all outstanding supply contracts. Standard, not optional. This one had been missed or overlooked, or simply lost in the paperwork shuffle of a service that processes thousands of contracts in any given year. And in the 30-plus years since that ship went to the breakers, shipments had continued against that purchase order on a rolling schedule without interruption. Spare parts, consumables, standard ship store items, the unglamorous inventory that keeps a vessel operational, all correctly invoiced against the original contract number, all correctly received according to the warehouse's own intake logs. 30 years of perfectly documented deliveries against a contract for a ship that no longer existed. I brought this to the warehouse manager. His name was Russo. Practical man, 15 years running that floor. The kind of operational competence that doesn't require much conversation to recognize. I laid out the discrepancy clearly because that is how I present discrepancies. Told him there was a procurement error. A contract that should have been closed at decommissioning was still active, still generating shipments, still occupying a bay. His reaction was wrong. Not confused, the way someone should be when you present them with an administrative anomaly they weren't aware of. Tired. The specific tired of a man who has been waiting for a particular question and was hoping it would be asked by someone other than him. He said the bay got restocked on schedule. He said nobody on his crew ordered it restocked. He said the trucks showed up on their own paperwork and the crew signed for the deliveries because that was the job. He said nobody questioned Bay 14 anymore because 3 different employees had, at different points over the years, and none of them worked there now. I asked what had happened to those 3 employees. He said 2 of them had quit without notice. The 3rd he didn't discuss, and he told me not to ask him about the 3rd one again. I noted his tone and moved on. I pulled every record I could find on Bay 14. The warehouse's digital archive went back to the early 2000s, and before that, it was paper, boxed in a back office. And I got Russo's permission to go through it. I went through all of it. The paper trail confirmed the digital record and extended it cleanly back to the warehouse's founding in the late 1980s. Bay 14 shipments from the beginning, always the same contract number, always correctly formatted, correctly invoiced, correctly received. 30 years of clean paperwork for a standing order that should have been administratively closed before the warehouse even opened. I did what a supply officer does when the paper doesn't tell him enough. I went and looked at the physical inventory myself during daylight hours, with Russo watching from the bay entrance, with an expression I can only describe as carefully neutral. The bay was fully stocked, shelving floor to ceiling, organized by item category the way a professional storekeeper organizes a bay. I walked the aisles with a scanner and checked item codes against the manifest for 2 hours. Everything matched. Every single line item present and accounted for, correctly labeled, correctly dated, receipt stickers going back years. I have audited inventory in ship supply departments, shore commands, and civilian warehouses across 24 years of professional work. Bay 14 was the most accurately maintained inventory bay I had ever personally inspected. Not approximately accurate, precisely, completely, perfectly accurate against its own manifest. That precision unsettled me in a way I am going to try to describe accurately, because I think the distinction matters. Disorder in a warehouse is a problem I know how to solve. Order of that particular quality, in that particular context, is something different. It suggested a system that had never lost track of itself. Not for 30 years. I checked the receiving log for delivery times across Bay 14's history. Most bays in the facility received between 0600 and 1800, standard business hours. Bay 14's deliveries were logged at irregular hours, frequently between 2200 and 400, well outside the facility's posted operating hours, when the warehouse should have been locked and unstaffed. I asked Russo who signed for deliveries when no one was on shift. He said the paperwork was always there in the morning. Signed, dated, correctly filed. He didn't know who signed it. He had stopped trying to find out. I asked to see the security camera footage for Bay 14's loading dock during one of the logged delivery windows. Russo pulled it up reluctantly, and we watched together. The footage covered the dock door for the full window during which the receiving log recorded a delivery being made and accepted. No truck, no driver, no movement at all. Timestamp running continuously, uninterrupted, through a period during which new stock somehow appeared on the shelves, was logged correctly against the standing purchase order, and was signed for by a hand that the cameras recorded no evidence of. I sat with that footage for a long time before I said anything else. I decided, against my better professional judgment, and directly against Russo's advice, to be present in the warehouse during a likely delivery window. The historical pattern in the logs suggested specific nights and time ranges. I picked one. I stationed myself in the office adjacent to Bay 14 with the lights off, a clipboard, and a flashlight. The way I used to do informal stock checks on ship when something didn't add up, and I wanted my own eyes on it rather than trusting paper. Around 02:30, I heard the bay door. Not the loading dock. The interior access door between the office corridor and the bay. It did not slam or creak. It opened and closed with the controlled movement of someone who has performed this exact task thousands of times and knows how to do it without disturbing anything. I did not go in immediately. I waited. An experienced supply officer learns patience in close quarters. I heard shelving being accessed, the specific sound of cataloged stock being placed correctly, not dropped, not stacked casually, but set down with the precision of someone trained in inventory handling, working through a restock in the methodical order that training produces. I opened the door. The bay was lit. I was certain I had left those lights off when I took my position. The shelving stretched in neat rows in full light, no one visible in any aisle. But at the far end, in the section I had noted that morning as holding the oldest standing inventory, one shelf was in the process of being restocked. I watched a box settle into place on that shelf. Settle, the way a box settles when someone has just set it down carefully. No hand placing it. No figure standing before it. I did not move further into the bay. I stood in the doorway and I watched. More boxes appeared on the shelves at a steady, unhurried pace, working through the aisle in order. The kind of order that comes from a storekeeper who knows their own bay well enough to work it by memory. The work rhythm was completely familiar to me. I have watched experienced storekeepers do inventory restocks for 24 years, and this was exactly that. The precision of it, the care of it. The activity stopped. The lights went out on their own a moment later, in the quiet way that indicates a switch being turned rather than a timer cutting power. I stood in the dark for a considerable time before I turned my flashlight on and walked to the shelf. The box was there. New stock, correctly labeled. Receipt sticker dated that night, that hour, in the correct format against the standing purchase order for a ship that has been at the bottom of a scrapyard for over 30 years. I finished my consulting contract. My official report to the warehouse's parent company recommended that Bay 14's purchase order be formally investigated and closed at the corporate level, since the originating contracting authority had been defunct since 1991, and the warehouse had no legal mechanism to simply stop honoring a standing federal order unilaterally. Proper channels exist for a reason, and in this case, the proper channel was a formal contract closure through whatever vestigial administrative authority still had standing over that original procurement. I did not include in the official report what I witnessed on the night of the 02:30 delivery. I included only the documented inconsistencies, the impossible delivery windows, the absence of any verifiable transport and security footage, the 30-year-old unclosed federal contract generating correctly processed shipments against a decommissioned vessel. I kept the rest in a private notebook. I looked further into the destroyer afterward, through old Navy supply networks I still have access to informally. Found a notation I hadn't seen in the initial search, a fleet-level performance note from the ship's final active years. The supply department had a reputation in the fleet for exceptional inventory accountability. 0 discrepancies on annual audits, multiple consecutive years. The kind of record that gets remembered in a community that takes accountability as seriously as the Supply Corps does, because 0 discrepancies across a full annual audit on an active warship is not a common achievement. I have thought about that a great deal since. A department that spent years maintaining a perfect accountability record, a ship that was decommissioned, its supply contracts not properly closed in the administrative transition, the open orders simply continuing to generate against a system that had never been formally told to stop. And somewhere on the other end of that open loop, a storekeeper's habit so ingrained that it kept executing the mission long after the vessel that gave the mission its purpose ceased to exist. I have not returned to that warehouse. I have, however, asked my old network to flag me if any other facility reports a similarly unclosed legacy Navy contract behaving this way. I have received 2 responses. I have not visited either site. I have the addresses. 24 years in the Supply Corps taught me that the one thing a system never forgives is an open loop. A requisition filed but never closed just sits there, technically active, technically owed, until someone with the proper authority finally reconciles it. That is not a metaphor. That is how procurement works. The system does not assume closure. The system waits for explicit instruction. I think whatever crew ran that ship's supply department took the job seriously enough that closing the loop wasn't optional to them, even after the ship herself stopped existing on paper. I think they're still filling the order the way they always filled it, carefully and completely, and on schedule, because nothing with the proper authority has told them through the proper channel that the account is settled and they can stand down. I just don't know who has that authority anymore. And until someone works that out and submits the correct paperwork through whatever channel still has standing to receive it, Bay 14 is going to keep getting restocked, correctly, completely, on schedule, by a crew that never received the memo that their ship went to the breakers in 1991.